We're joined this evening by Wes McDermott. Wes is head of Substance 3D um, evangelism at Adobe, and he's going to be sort of talking tonight about Substance Painter and sort of hopefully showing people some sort of insights and tips and tricks about how to use that software in a very cool way. So, Wes, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Paul. So, hello, everyone. It's really cool to be here. I really appreciate it. And yeah, so I'm just going to have like a chill session. I just outlined some things I thought I would just kind of go over in Painter. Just maybe it's some just overall tips and just a few techniques and things like that. But I love to keep it completely open. So if anybody has any questions, I think I have the right chat window. I haven't actually really used Discord a lot. So I think I have it working right. Like the screen is sharing, and I have the chat window. So I'll try to keep checking that. But yeah, if we have questions or anything, Paul, just interrupt me if you want, and just say, hey, this is a question, and we can
Cool.
cover it as we go.
Sounds good.
Um, all right, well, let's jump in and just start looking at a few things. So, like I said, hopefully this will be some interesting stuff. Like I said, just kind of basic. What I did was I just looked at some kind of basic kind of workflows in Painter that I usually find like when we're doing lots of demos and things like that to different users at different conferences, like questions that always come up. So at some point I'd love to turn this into like a tutorial, like where I'm going through like, hey, these like top 10 things to be aware of in Painter or something like that. So yeah, let's jump in and take a look. So I have the little meat mat guy here to start off as we kind of always do. And let me just start with something really basic. So like if I'm just looking at my materials, I'm just going to throw a quick material on his head here. And let's see. This is something that I see comes up quite a bit. And if I'm just going to go over here and look at my shader settings, you'll notice that there's this quality setting to the shader. And it's set like super low. And it depends on the project. Like this quality setting will get saved with the project. But you can also create like templates as well for Painter projects. So, and you know what's funny is I've never done this in like the whole time I've worked here. So I say it all the time, you should do it, but I've never done it. I tend to like just reset it up every time. But anyways, you can save out like your whole scene, like all your settings, this quality setting, different shader settings, and save that as a template so that when you do come over here to like file new and you're selecting, you can select from like one of your own templates that basically has everything set up. But in the case that you haven't done that before, you can probably run into this issue quite a bit. So let's take a look at what this does. So first off, I'm just going to create like a fill layer. And this is just, you may already know this, but this is just kind of a simple way that I usually kind of work is I'll start with like my base layer. And I try to think about Painter as like this material, procedural material tool. And so a lot of times I'll start off with like a base layer and I try to stay away from like adding lots of information all in this one layer. I like to kind of break things off and make a lot of layers. And the reason why is because I can like easily name them. So like this could be, hey, this is roughness information we're working with. And it only has like roughness slider. So right now I have this little uniform slider here, which is good. So what I want to do though is I'll typically kind of mask this layer and then throw a fill layer into that. And then let's say we jump over here to, let's say, our textures, and we'll do a search here for grunge. And I'm just going to grab just one of these guys and just throw it in. So now we have a little bit of this grunge map that's coming into play here. And we can do lots of things with this. We can tile it. So like if I just, tile this by 2 or something, we can play around with it. But one of the other things that's kind of nice about using a workflow like this is that I can come into here and now I have this little slider that lets me kind of dial this effect up and down, and that grunge map is controlling it. So I kind of tend to work this way for pretty much everything I'm doing in Painter. If I'm doing just a color, I'll break out a new fill layer, set the color, and then mask it. But then this color is always going to be on top. And then that gives me like an input, kind of like, I guess what I'm doing is I'm kind of thinking about it in terms of how I used to work in Substance Designer and thinking about trying to keep things procedural. So that's just kind of a basic workflow. Now, so we have this set up, and I do this like all the time, but the problem becomes like, okay, well, I've been working this way, building out my roughness, but my shader samples per pixel is like super low. So what happens is if I jump over to my shader quality, and you'll watch, if I set this up to say 256, my roughness changes. And I see this happen quite a bit. So when you export, if this was set at low, and then I export my maps and I take them into say something like Unreal Engine, it always looks different. Like it's way more reflective, or things look a lot more shiny. What's the problem? And most of the time I have found, like when I've troubleshoot people's files, like it's this setting right here. It's always set low. So you just want to be careful about this. And typically what I do is I just set it to like very high. And this is a little bit of a tricky situation to be in because of the way lighting works inside of Substance Painter. So everything is lit by this HDR image that we're working on. So if I jump over here to my, environment, opacity, I'll take the blur down. As you know, everything's being lit by this HDR. And we use a method called importance sampling to basically determine how the lighting is going to work. And really what this comes down to is the overall kind of fidelity you get in your roughness map. Like if you look at roughness values from like as a grayscale value, the lower this samples per pixel setting is, the least amount of like steps you get. So at a very low setting, like 4 samples per pixel, you get something that looks super super rough because it's really only sampling, 4 pixels, 4 samples per pixel, but that it's like giving you like a very small kind of like gradient of what the roughness is going to be in terms of black to white value. So you really can't fully represent what your roughness looks like. That's why I'll typically keep this pretty high. I have found that when working with, say, UE Unreal, this is a good setting here. It kind of gets it approximate a little bit. But there always is going to be this discrepancy between Painter and other applications. I'll say real-time applications like maybe Unity or Unreal, because of, again, we're using importance sampling for the background, which is a bit higher quality than something that's like a MIPT cube map that you would have in like a real-time engine. So that's one of the things. But again, keeping this quality setting up pretty high will make a huge difference. So that's something I kind of wanted to bring up for this first little tip. And let's see, the next thing, like I said, I'm going to keep that here, and let's jump over to, maybe I'm just going to turn this on to that panoramic here. Okay, and take that down. All right, so we have this little guy in here. Something else that I kind of wanted to mention was just using different layers. So for example, and using these different blending modes. So let's try something. Let me grab maybe a smart material, and I'm going to see if I can find one that maybe will kind of work with what I want to do here. Let's see. I don't know. I guess I'll just grab this guy here, put this on. All right, so we have this little smart layer and smart material. If we look, it's made up of a few layers, nothing too crazy. But sometimes what you want to do is you want to be able to work with some different, look, like it depends too. You could have like tons and tons of layers. And sometimes I want to work with something like it's an adjustment layer, something like you would do in Photoshop, where you could, I just want to make an adjustment layer and do like a hue saturation change or something. And so one of the ways that we used to work with that is, one of the ways I would try to work with that would be, I would always just bump a fill layer on top of everything that I'm working on. And then I would jump over to my materials, and you can Alt left click on one of these channels, and that'll basically just disable everything. That's kind of a quick little workflow there. And so once this guy is set up, what I would do is, like, this would be basically, I would say, hey, this is going to be color adjustment. All right, so we have this in place. And what I want to do is I basically want to use this pass-through blending mode. So if I jump over here to my drop-down, you'll see we have all these blending modes, but we have this one called pass-through. And what this does is it's going to basically pull in a bunch of texture information. So for example, now if I turn off the color, essentially what I'm doing is I'm taking all the color information for all the layers that are below this layer, and I'm passing them up through into this main layer. So if I hit, of course, a channel, it's going to override that. So I want to keep that off. So basically, this is a fill layer that's not doing anything but just passing information up to it. And sometimes I use this as, like I said, an adjustment layer, or kind of a way to think about merging everything down, like merging all my layers down. And so that becomes kind of just like a helpful way to kind of work with this. Now that I have this layer selected, I could go in and start to add some filters on top of this. So for example, a lot of times I'll just add like a hue saturation on top, and then maybe I want to just decrease the saturation slightly here. So I'll actually over crank it so you can really see what's going on. But I'm actually changing my saturation for all the color values underneath of it. So it's kind of just a pretty quick way to work. And it allows you to, like I said, think of it like just merging all the layers down. And it's one of the things that I use quite often. So another thing here on this layer, we could also drop down to say our roughness information, and I'm going to set that to pass through as well. So now I have basically, here, let's change this guy from adjustment to, yeah, from color to just adjustments. And maybe now what I do is I just throw levels on top of this guy, and for the affected channel, we'll set this to roughness. And now I'm seeing a histogram of all the roughness information for all the layers below it. And so here is where I can also go in and start to just, tweak that overall kind of roughness. So it's kind of something I'll do at the very end of a set of layers that I'm working on, is just have this little fill layer on top of it. Now, we do have a new option, and I haven't actually tried this yet, so this will be the first time I try it in front of an audience of people, so hopefully it'll work. But one of the things that we did add in a recent update was on folders. We now give you the capability to add these filters. So, for example, I should be able to add a filter to this folder group now, and then come in and grab my hue saturation. And I think, yep, there we go. So now this works. So this technique I'm showing you up above here was kind of like the workaround of what you had to do. And recently, can't remember exactly what version, it was pretty recent, but we added this capability, which is cool. So you'll notice here with this HSL is that it's only affecting the color information because that's what's enabled here. Now, I should also be able to now come in and throw a levels on top of this guy and do the same thing. Let's go and grab my roughness information for everything and then make some tweaks here to this guy. So I'm getting the same technique that I would with this adjustments layer, but it's all just part of the folder. So I can completely delete that new layer and work as you can see here. So this becomes a much better, more optimized way of working, and it's a welcome addition. Like I said, I was so used to doing the pass-through that I haven't used this lately, so just wanted to try it for the first time. Glad to see that it worked. So that's really cool. So with that, there's another option here that I wanted to show you guys as well. So let's look at this, because this is all talking about blending modes. So now let's do something where, okay, let's do this. Let me add a fill layer here, and I'm just working on his head again. So I just want to get a little bit of information here. So let's do something like, a little blue. I always like to try to desaturate these color values slightly, because I never want anything to be a pure color. And then what I'm going to do is, I think here, I'm just going to do a different kind of technique here. Let's jump over to my texture libraries. And here, this is a good one, Clouds 1. So I'm just going to drag and drop and place this guy here into my height information, which is up here. So now I'm completely overriding everything. I do have a few controls, but like I said, sometimes I'll work this way. And this is going to end up being like my base layer, my base material layer. And then if I need to rework that height information, I'll throw a levels on top of this, affected channel being height. And now I can, go in and tweak this information here because I want that just to be, kind of a slight value. So again, another kind of great way to use these little adjustments like levels and things like that on layers. So now we have this guy here. And so this could be a base, and then typically on top of that, we're going to throw another layer on top of it. And so this could be like, layer 2 on top, and this is going to be maybe just some kind of like weird green value. Now, already right off the bat, I'm starting to get this issue where, okay, well, this layer's on top. There is height and normal. Everything is enabled. If I look on this layer, I'm working with height information, the normal information as well. I'm going to take a slight, veer off the path here just to mention something. So one of the other things, too, is that you have like your height channel and then you have your normal information. So right now I have normal, right? And I'm not really working with any normal. It's just a flat normal, and I'm creating height. Is that whenever in Substance Painter, whenever you put in height or grayscale information to the height channel, so we are working with height information, and you can work with displacement, right? So if I wanted to jump over to my shader and come over to my displacement setting and increase the scale, and then increase my subdivision count, technically, I actually am displacing this mesh. So it is something that you can do with height. However, one of the main things that we're kind of doing with this is that we do this conversion where you put height information in, and then the shader in the background is actually converting this height to normal. So if you're using Substance Designer a lot, it's the same technique that you would use over and over. You start grayscale, use your height, and then you'd use like the height to normal nodes to like convert that height into normal information. And in this particular case that I have right now, this is perfect. This is all well and good because I have my height information and then I have my normal information, but it's a flat normal. However, sometimes when you download materials, you'll notice that you'll get this kind of effect where sometimes the materials, the height information has all this detail in it, and then the normal map is the exact same detail. So it could have been when it was authored in Designer that they basically just said, hey, this is my exact height information. I'm just going to convert it straight to normal and just pipe that into the output. And then what happens is well, I have my normal, I have my height, but then the Substance Painter shader is actually converting that height to normal, so you get this effect of a double normal look. We'll run into that a little bit later on in the night as we kind of go through some different techniques. But I just want you to be aware of that. That's just something that we do. While we were at GDC, I was talking to the engineers and we were thinking about this. So hopefully in the future, there'll be some type of way that we can better kind of delineate between these two, because the idea would be you never want the exact same height information in the normal information. Like maybe the height would be slightly blurred and then the normal would be like more high frequency. So the height is more of a displacement for like shape and form versus the normal giving you a lot of that kind of like real fine high frequency detail. So we kind of want to watch for that. So sorry, I went off on a path there. I'm just going to let you know. So as of right now, we have height normal. It looks fine because my normal's blank. But I have this layer on top and I'm overwriting it. So, well, my height information here is enabled and it's at 0 and my normal's but why is it not overwriting? So one of the things that we do for all our channels is we are constantly looking to blend channels from the layers below with the layers above. And you'll run into that a lot when you look at the channel effector. So sure enough, if I look at my height information, you'll see, oh, it's set to this linear dodge mode. Same thing with the normal. If I go to normal, it's set to this normal detail mode, which is like doing this normal combine. Kind of the same process that we see inside of Substance Designer. So if we jump this back here to base color, typically what I would do is I would come into here and say, oh, let me go to my height. Let me set this to normal so you can see it overwrites it and so on and so forth. And you would do that a lot. Well, we finally, very recently, added an option here for this. So one of the things, I bring this in, if you just right click on a layer, there is a new option for dealing with blending modes right here. And there's lots of these different channels you can work with. So for example, the first one is what I'm going to use. Hey, apply the blending mode to all channels. And what it's looking at is whatever the first blending mode is. So in my case, I'm working with base color and I'm seeing that the blending mode is normal. Perfect. So why don't I go into here and just say, hey, take that normal blending mode and just throw that to all channels. Boom. And it overwrites everything. So it's a really handy way to like quickly set your layers up. So right click. Whoops, got to right click on the layer. Blending, and then you also have things like I want to apply opacity to all channels, or I want to apply, both opacity and the blending mode to all channels. So it could be that I set up some type of blending here, and I want this, 37% of opacity to work through all my channels. I can easily copy that down with this handy right-click menu. You can also copy channel blending settings from one layer to the next. So if I wanted to say copy these channels here, and then way up in the stack, I have another set of layers, I can just right click and then there'd be an option to paste it in too. So that just is kind of becomes a handy, quick way, and super glad I found myself using this all the time now, just using this applied blending mode to all channels. Okay, so I'm just kind of looking over at the chat here to see if there's any questions.
There's a few questions,
actually,
but I think you can. Well, it's up to you. You can
yeah.
answer. Yeah.
Let's do those at the end. I think
Yeah.
that'll be better.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let me move on to a couple other things. These are just some simple things, and then we'll get into some other techniques here, some actual techniques. So one of the things that we've added that was like really awesome, but it's like one of those things that it should have been there from day one, is if you jump over to the display tab under the environment, there is now this environment alignment, which you can set to camera. So now if I move underneath, I can see underneath the models now. I think anyone who knows that I'm the excitement in that is gone through the pain of not being able to do that. So you'll notice that before it was like this, and it would be dark, and you couldn't see what you were painting underneath. It was such a pain because you could just rotate. But now, just know that you can set that to camera. This would be a great time to set these settings and then save this out as a, I think where you come in here to save, more save options, save as template. So this would be I can't believe I've never actually done this, but like set up everything that you want to set up and then do more save options, save as template, and then it would always be there for you. Like for me, I typically use this new camera alignment mode like all the time for everything. So that's pretty good. So let's see here. Another thing that was, and a lot of these things I'm showing you too. Like I've noticed, let me know in the chat if you've seen these because this one is super obscure. It was funny because I was like, "What is this?" And I had to ask the dev team, and some of those guys didn't even know. It was hilarious because I was like, they were like, "Good question. I don't know what that does either." So let's take a look at this setting. So if I create a paintable layer now, and let me come over to my paint brushes, and you'll notice, of course, we have all these Photoshop brushes in here now. Let me try to grab one of these guys that might, I don't know, maybe this one. All right, so I have this well, I don't like that one. I don't know. Maybe this is okay. All right, so we'll come in and let me just right click, open up my materials here, and let's just make this like a dark material maybe. See if this is working. Whoops, I was on the wrong, I need to paint on the head. All right, so I'm coming over here and painting. So we've always had this issue like within painters. You have your paintbrush and I'm painting with basically, I'm either painting my masking or I have alpha in this particular brush. So as I come over here and I start to kind of paint, you can see I'm painting and I have this little buildup and everything's kind of working as expected. However, there's a little bit of this discrepancy that's happening with what the mask of the alpha is and what's actually painting. So there's this super obscure mode. If I right click on the layer, way down here, there's a setting called gamma corrected alpha mask. And if I enable this, you can see that I'm actually going to get a change here. So you'll notice that before I had this, there's a gamma issue that's happening. So if I look at what I'm painting here, let me do this if I can try to get this to work. Let's say, so I have all these jitter settings, right? Let's just turn all these guys off. I should be able to get, nope. Let's see here. Flow, let's turn off that. Oops. I should be able to just do a stamp now. Oh, turn that off. There we go. All right, so follow path was on. All right, so if I come over and I just click, and there's another jitter on somewhere. I think it's my angle, but do I have it? There. Okay, so you'll notice, I come in and I click. It's not really following correctly along with what the actual texture is or the mask of it. So what we can do is we can right click and come into here and choose to gamma correct the alpha mask. And what that does, whoops, let me actually enable this guy. That is going to give you a more accurate blending when you're working with your stamps. And you'll notice here there's this little eye icon right up here. It just means that hey, this layer has a gamma corrected alpha mask in play. And so that I what in the world is that for, right? So that was something I recently ran into that's actually been pretty helpful. So what's going on with that is it's a change that the team made to the way the brush and alpha mask is just being blended under the hood. And the reason they did that is just to help replicate the more closely the blending behavior of Photoshop, especially when you're using these ABR brushes that are coming. So these brushes, all of them that say Photoshop, these are actually just ABR brushes. So if you didn't know, you could be in Photoshop, and if you make a Photoshop brush and just save that as an ABR, you can just drag and drop that into Painter and it'll just import. So we can natively read ABR files. However, and if you've been using Painter for years and years, you'll notice that we've always had this issue, especially when Substance Painter first came out. It was really interesting because everyone was still using Photoshop at the time, and it was like, oh, the Photoshop blending modes are different when I go from Painter. Well, if you look here, we have all these blending modes, and it looks like they're kind of similar to the ones you'd see in Photoshop, but they're not the same algorithms. The reason being, and if I'm correct in saying this, I don't think Adobe would give us the blending modes. They were proprietary or something like that. But now that we work at Adobe, I'm pretty sure we can get them now. So anyways, that's kind of nice. But at the time of Substance painter just being created, like, yeah, these are all like custom. So there was always discrepancy when like I would paint something and try to take it into Photoshop and have to do something on top. So part of this is coming from those days of like, well, the way the blending modes work internally with Painter versus say something like Photoshop, they're not working correctly. But I do find that this is kind of a nice way to work as well, because you'll get a little bit of a different look, totally different than what I had previously. Okay. So there's that one. Another thing I wanted to kind of run into was using dynamic strokes, because I don't see a lot of people using those very often. I just wanted to kind of talk about that a little bit. So this was a feature that we added a long time ago, and it's quite difficult feature to understand, and I think that's why maybe we don't get a lot of use out of it. Well, I don't know. I'd love to poll you guys and see what you think, but I don't see a lot of people using it very often. So dynamic stroke. So right now I have basically a brush, and I have like a brush tip or my alpha. And as I paint, I'm just painting with this alpha, and it's using the same alpha every time. But we developed a system that allows us to overwrite this stroke, and we call it the dynamic stroke. So for example, if I jump over here to my alpha, a really good way to show it, if I come into dynamic, and you'll see we got a couple of these guys. This brush maker kind of showcases it really well. So I'll grab brush maker here, and if you look, it's kind of doing something. Let's just look and see what this is doing. So first things first, for the pattern, let's jump this into, so there's a bunch of patterns you can make, or custom shapes. Let's do a custom alpha. And then for the image input, I'm going to look for an arrow. Let's grab this guy. And so now I have an arrow. If I start to paint, see, something's happening here. Let's also come over here and turn on follow path. I'll increase my brush size, and now I paint. I'm starting to get something here, and I'm going to just let's just set that angle to 180, because I want it to follow kind of along this way. All right, so now you can see I'm starting to get something, but what's interesting is there's basically this distance time. So as I click and drag, you'll see there's 2 strokes, 3, 4, 5, I think it goes to 10, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, oh, more, 11, 12, 13, 14, 18, 19, 20, might be 24 or 25, and then it starts over. So then it starts to start over. So what it's doing is, if we look at the brush maker, you can go in and start to set up various settings here. So first things first, the start value is at 0, and you can do something kind of neat. Like, let's say that I start with a start and end value of 0 and 0, and I have a middle value in my middle position. And if I start to paint, you'll notice that I get this kind of stroke, which is like, here, let's take the middle value up even higher. So you can get like neat strokes kind of like this. So it's just, there's all kinds of neat things you can do with this. And you have opacity. Say my start value is going to be 0, my end is going to be 1, middle value is here. And now I'm painting with like, transparency here as you come in. Rotation is the same way. Let's start with a rotation value of 0. Let's do an end value. I'm just going to tweak a couple of these guys. And now I'm getting some, just variance here as I'm painting the stroke. So I'm basically holding down and doing a stroke, and then it's changing these values as I paint. So this is just a tool that we created, Brush Maker. It's part of an alpha, and it just lets you kind of set up your own brushes. You can get some really cool experimental brushes going. And of course, you can always right-click and save this as a brush preset or as a material preset. The material preset would just be these basic settings I have here. But let's say that you have something that's a brush. I want it to be metallic, less rough. Let's see. So now it's painting this, and we'll make this kind of like a little bright value. So we're getting something like that. Here, let's just do like a gold. This guy around here. So we're painting that. You can save this, right-click, and save it as a tool preset, which is going to save my brush settings here, my alpha, any stenciling I had, as well as my material. It's going to save it all for you, all those settings. So what's interesting about that is we can also go in and start to play around with things like our jitter. So I'll position this stuff up, get a new layer here, go in and start to paint. And now I'm using a huge combination of things to create like a single stroke. What's also really interesting about this system is that you can create these yourself. So if you're well-versed in using Substance Designer, you can go in and you can start to use Substance Designer to create your own dynamic strokes. So kind of an option of that would be like we had this autumn leaves. And so you can see this is basically taking a stamp. It was a leaf material from Designer, and it's just there's like 5 or 6 of them, and then it's using there's a function graph that's basically taking a look at, and you can see it here under, if I look at the alpha for this guy, it should be dynamic stroke setting. And then you have a couple options here. Now, these get built in as soon as you create your own dynamic stroke. But for example, you can say, hey, my start sample, I want to start it at 0. So if in Designer, let's say you had like, 5 or 6 different leaves, and they're in basically they're in like one container, you can say start always at 0 and move through my list of leaf materials, or you can have a random index. The cycle count is how many cycles it's going to go through. So for example, it's set to 32 by default, but you could take it way down to like say 2, and it should only do like the first 2 or so on. And then there's other settings in here. But once you set this up, there's just 2 variables you can create in Designer: the stamp cycle count and the random seed type. So you can do something like, I want to randomize per stroke, and here I'll just set this back up a little bit higher. Randomize per stroke everything that I'm doing, and you can get some really, really cool different dynamic stroke effects. But if you just want to play with it, like I said, just using that brush maker is a great way to kind of jump in and start playing with that guy. All right, so another thing that I want to kind of take a look at, just shifting gears. I know I'm running through a bunch of stuff. Just wanted to try to cover tons of things. Let's look at, this is going to hit a couple different techniques. Let's jump into creating a new document. And I'm going to come into File and choose Select, and I'm going to grab this Stepladder USD. So one of the things that I think is really exciting is on the Substance team, we're really adopting USD pretty heavily. There's lots of really exciting new things that are coming down the pipe that I think is going to be awesome for the future. But more and more, we're starting to adopt USD across the applications. So recently, we did an update to USD in Painter. So I have the Stepladder USD, and I'm going to click Open. And there's a couple really great things about this. Number one, once you open in the USD type, you can see that there is an option to look or change the scope and variance. So for example, if I click this particular USD file has some different shading variants and shape variants associated with it. So there's 3 different shading variants. I'm going to leave this at A, but then you have this open and closed ladder. So for example, if I set this to closed, this is going to open up a different version of this ladder. So inside the USD file, there's the step ladder is open and one that's closed. So we'll click OK. We're going to load that. There's also an option here where you can select what frame. So this is really cool. If you had like a mesh that's animated and you want to choose, hey, I need to paint, maybe it's a character and the arm opens up and I need to paint like under where, under the arm or something. You could say, hey, on frame 29, the arm is up. I'm going to use that as my painting, which is pretty cool. Another thing that's great, and I don't know why it's grayed out for this particular, I think it's because this one doesn't have sub D levels to it. But one of the things that you can do, and I use this quite a lot, is if you grab a mesh that is USD, you can actually increase the sub D level. So it's kind of like being able to like subdivide your mesh here inside of Painter. So we'll go ahead and click OK. Let's get rid of matte. And now the ladder comes in. There's an actual problem with this ladder mesh. That's why the normals look really bad. So that was just, I just wanted to show you this. That was the closed version. So let's go to File, New. Let's do the same thing. Step ladder. I'm pretty sure the open works. Let's do this guy. But you'll see the ladder comes in. Yeah, see the shading's okay on that one. There's something broken with that other version, but the ladder's open. So all in one file, I can open that up. Pretty interesting. So that's kind of some of the USD imports if you're going to leverage that. Like I said, I'm starting to use it a lot more. It's super helpful. So something else that I like to showcase is let's look at using some of these UV generators. So for example, let's say that I have this layer here, and I'm going to give it just like, I don't know, maybe like a red value or maybe something like this. Okay, let's go with that. And let's come over here and create a black mask for this guy and add a generator. This is a generator I use often. So if we look at the actual UVs for this guy, you can see that, well, it's in one texture set, and I have a lot of different UV shells. This is going to be perfect for this. So what I can do is just come over here to my UVs, and we have a couple things here, but the one that's super helpful here is this UV random color. So if I drop this guy into here, what it's going to do is if I alt left click on my mask, it's going to randomize the grayscale value for all the UV shells. So pretty helpful here. You also have a couple different options, like you can choose a custom gradient and then throw in a gradient here. So if I grab maybe just this linear gradient. And then I play with my, let's see, this one's kind of hard to work. Let's try getting this to be flipped. There we go. So I flipped it. And now you can see I'm just kind of customizing what the gradients are going to be. So maybe, I don't know, maybe that looks pretty good like this. So you can see just for the steps is what I'm looking at. I'm getting this different versioning. So if I hit M to go back to my material, I'm now getting a little bit of a different value based on, what the layer is going to look like here. So this could be a great case for something like, let's say that, let's turn this off and let's say that this is going to be like a metal layer. So I have metal for this area, and then on this layer on top of it, maybe this is going to be like some dirt or something. And let's take the metalness down. Let's take the roughness up. We do something like that. So now I'm kind of overwriting this from here. Or it could be a situation where sometimes I'll go through and pick this UV random and then on top of my color, just quickly throw in a filter on top of this guy and do like an HSL. And then from here, I can adjust my lightness for the material just based on the randomization of those UV shells. This technique is what I use probably most of the time, which is create a layer, quickly grab the UV random because I know I have my UV shells, throw, an HSL on top of it, and then just use that to slightly just change the or the lightness, just darken it or or desaturate something. And so it just helps kind of break things up based on, those different UV shells. So kind of an interesting way to work. Let's see. The next thing, let's do this. So now I'm going to create another file. And I have something here in this little pillar guy. Let's set this to 2048 and bring this guy in. All right, so this is just like a little pillar I was playing around with. And let's see, I'm going to use this to do a few things. First thing I want to talk about is physical size, which is seriously one of my new favorite features in Painter. So if I want to jump out to Substance 3D assets, and I'm actually going to use just this Creative Cloud desktop app to get it. And the reason I'm doing that is because it just has this little send to, and it's kind of easy to work with sometimes. So let me do this. Well, yeah, I think stone was good. So I'm just looking through some of my materials. Yeah, maybe this guy. I think, yeah, this will be good. So like I said, I'm using this app because I can click this little send to button and it sees Substance Painter, so I can just send it in. So it's a little faster in some cases than going to the website. So you'll see this is going to download and then just send right into Painter. This is based on a scan mesh, I think, so it's just a little bit heavier. But let's just check this guy out. Okay, I think it worked. Yep, so it's been sent over. And now if I jump back over here to Painter, there it is. Oh, I already had it in here too. All right, so here's the stone wall. So now I can just drag and drop. And I'm going to place it here on this bottom part of the pillar, and it's going to load in the material. Now, just looking at the layer, let's go over and, well, I'm going to enable my height information. So this will also show you guys something here with what I was talking about with that height and normal. But let's go and take a look at my UV. So we have UV projection, you have triplanar, you can work with all these things. So for example, if I set this to triplanar, okay, that's good. I'm getting, it's helping me to kind of get rid of these seams, but then I need to go in and like maybe scale this down. I could adjust the tiling of it. But one of the new options that we added, which under scale, is this new physical size. This is great. So if I hit physical size, it's going to automatically just adjust itself. And the reason or how that works, and if I go over to this guy, it should tell me, let's see, if I go to more info. Yeah, so if I look at the size, this has actually been generated at a physical size. And this little pillar, I modeled this guy and I made this, I think it's like, well, it's U.S. sizes. I'd say 8 feet. It probably doesn't mean anything to you guys, but yeah, it's about 8 feet. So I modeled it to scale, which is great. So now I can use physical scale. And I love this feature. It's like whenever you create anything, especially game props or anything, I mean, you're always going to work with physical size anyways. And so all the substance materials you grab from 3D assets, they have this. If you're making your own materials in Substance Designer, you can enter this information in. And the other thing that I really like is if you're ever using Substance Sampler to create your own materials, like say from images, there is a really awesome tool for that. Would love to show it to you guys just really quick. I can just do this really fast. But I won't do the whole thing, but I'll just show you what it is. But it's a really awesome tool for being able to create, the actual setup for physical size. You know what? I probably don't. Yeah, perfect. I had a strap here. All right. So say I bring this in, right, and I'm just going to do image to material. It's going to look terrible, but that's okay. We're going to do this. So say that I'm trying to make this material. So I have this strap. I photographed this. It was off a wheelchair actually. So I have this strap. I won't worry about how bad it looks right now, but there's this really great setting where you go into physical size. I want to set physical size for this. And then you can go into your tools and you can actually manually measure the distance. So it takes me into this distance tool, and I have this set to inches because I was in the US, but like there's a setting in here in the preferences where it's by default, it's in centimeters. But anyways, I could come over here and I can drag my A to B here, and this is roughly like what it was, I think, but I can set it to say like, oh, this was so many centimeters or something. And then once this is set up and I hit done, it's going to embed that physical scale information. And I can even enable this option to reset that for physical scale. So what's awesome is when I go to export this, or if I want to send this right into Substance Painter from Sampler, this physical scale property would be set up. And so it works great once this comes in and you're working with that. I use this all the time as much as I possibly can. I really love the feature. Now, right now, you'll see that I did this based on a triplanar projection. However, we did add this. This is really recent, is if you're under UV projection now, it's going to look bad because of the way the UVs are on this particular asset. They're flipped all in all different directions. That's why I was using triplanar. But the physical size is still working. We added physical size to UV as well. So that's pretty great. So you don't have to always use triplanar. But in my case, I needed to use triplanar for this guy. Okay, so that's physical size and how that kind of works. It's a really nice way to work. So now I wanted to start kind of moving more into some just different techniques of how we can start to work with things. So for example, I am going to look at doing something kind of simple here. Let me jump over to my texture set settings and jump into my bake mesh maps. And so we have our new baking window here. I am just going to look at baking just positional information. And I'm using the normalization type is set to B sphere and full scene. In case you didn't know, it sets, I think it defaults to full scene. But like full scene means it's going to bake for the full scene, like all the objects as one positional gradient. So this little sphere at the top is the top, and then all the way down here at the bottom is the bottom. You can set it to per material, and so for each material, I believe this is all one material, but if let's say each of these three mesh parts was a material, it would do a positional gradient for each material. I don't know if there's a great use case for that, but there probably is. All right, so position, I'm going to go to common settings. I'm going to set this to 2048, and let's bake this guy really quick. Just want to get a little positional information. I can also move around, use this in real time while it's baking to check things. Okay, so I have that information. Oh, one other thing I'm going to show you guys. You'll notice here, this is showing me some matching errors, I believe. UVC. Nope, this is showing me, I love how this works. So this particular object, I can see that there are, so I have some hard edges here, and it's telling me, hey, you're missing seams on these hard edges. So whenever you have a hard edge, you want to make sure that you have a smoothing split to coincide with that with padding. So for example, if this was my high res or my low res and I was baking something even higher from this, I would see like black lines all over this bake. So this is a great way to kind of visualize where I've kind of screwed this up in terms of the modeling side. I would make sure, these are hard edges. I need to fix that and make them not hard edges, probably smooth everything. But this is a nice little tool to be able to see those types of issues. All right, so we jump back here to painting, and now I have basically my brick. And let's say I want to start working with some dirt into here. So what I could do is we'll create a layer on top of everything. Let's jump into, one thing I'll show you guys real quick too. So if I jump over here and take a look at my height information, so I have this, the brick is the height. And then if I also look at my normal information, you can see it's pretty much the same. So that's where you get into this double normal issue that we have. So if you look, if I turn off the normal, oh, I was on the wrong layer. This guy, if I turn off the normal, that's what it should probably look like. So it's just the height information. And like I said, we're taking that height layer and we are converting that to a normal. So it could be a situation where, okay, I'm getting this double normal on top of this, and I don't really want that. So I'm just going to probably in this case turn off, whoops, I didn't mean to turn off everything. I just want to turn off my normal channel because that is more appropriate to what this should probably look like. Okay, so we got this guy. We're going to add a layer on top. Again, because this is going to be, something that I want to place or overwrite, what I might do really quickly is use my little new blending mode, apply blending mode to all channels. So I'm basically overwriting everything. So I could go that route. Let's give this, but in my case, I'm just showing you that was an option. But I think what I really want to do here is probably just use color and roughness so it doesn't really matter. And that'll be fine. So I'll increase my roughness information. And in this case, I am going to, let's just set a color for this guy. So let me try, I don't know, I'll probably definitely change this in a minute, but we'd have a basic color. And then I'm going to mask this guy and then jump into my generators. And I'm going to use my positional generator here. And so now what this does, if I alt left click on the layer, you can see I've got my nice positional gradient. In my case, I want to flip this guy. So let's just do a global invert. And then you have your balance setting here that you can use. So I might want to contrast this guy a little bit. I can kind of play around with this. And now if I hit M on the keyboard to go back to my material mode and I play around with this global balance, this is kind of more what I want. I want some kind of dirt in this bottom piece. Okay, so that's kind of working for me, but it looks exactly like what it is. I have this information and then I've just pasted some color on top of it. It doesn't look good. So what I want to do is, and this is something I'll kind of do a lot. So I jump back down to this layer and I know, well, I do have some nice height information, but you know what? This probably has ambient occlusion with it too. And I'm not using ambient occlusion. So I need to jump over to my texture set settings and let's click plus on the channel. Let's grab myself an ambient occlusion channel. So I have that added. If I jump back to my layers, now I have my AO information. Let's turn that on. Whoops. It was on. Let me just double check it. Yeah, there is some AO. It's very, very, it's not super intense, but because this is a substance material under technical parameters, you have like these little image editing capabilities. So let me just increase the intensity on that a little bit, get a little bit more extra strength there in that AO. Okay, so I have this AO information as well. Maybe that'll be useful. So what I like to do, and I use this extensively, is anchor points. Anchor points is probably another one of my most favorite features of Substance Painter. I absolutely love it. Every single project I'm using anchor points. So what I'll do on a layer is I'll just jump in and say, hey, grab me an anchor point. So what this does is it just gives me like this pin or this point of the layer that any channel information, and I have all this channel information to work with: color, height, rough, metal. I don't know why metal's enabled, but it's there. AO, all this stuff. And I have all that data, and it means I can use it anywhere. So what I'm going to do now is I'll probably jump back over to this layer, and let's grab a fill on top of this guy. And for the grayscale information, I'll click this button, I'll go to anchor points, and then I'll grab this worn limestone wall, and I'll select it. So now I'm using the anchor point. What's cool about this is what I'm looking at right now is the information from the anchor of just the base color information, but I could choose any of that data. So for example, if I look at AO, well, I have some AO information. This is probably going to work pretty well. So why don't there's also, we put this little mini levels for every anchor point fill layer that you create. So I could just invert it, and then I could, maybe play around with this. So see what this kind of gives me. That might be interesting. Sometimes I like to play around with some of the other channels. What's height give me? I think I want to use the height instead, maybe. So I'm just going to play with this. Get something like that. All right, that looks pretty cool. So now I have this in place. I could come over to the blending mode of this channel and just multiply it down. And then if I hit my M key, I come back, and now I have this gradient, but with some of this dirt. And then it's just a matter of coming in and just playing with that levels effect. So I think I was clamping it too much. So let's do this. Maybe get something a little bit more like that. So now I've created this, it's occluding in this occluded area. It's all coming from that intensity information that's from the layer below. Let's set this color layer here to multiply. So we get that. It's way too intense. So I've done that. I'm just going to back it off. We'll do something like that. And now I have this like nice little kind of procedural mask part of this. So if we jump into our position and I play around with that global balance, I can move this kind of up and down like this. Pretty cool. So I love this technique. It just really helps when I'm using layers and stuff like that. Maybe it needs to be inverted, or I could do two of these and put one on top. Sometimes I'll use this for like a moss layer or something like that. So yeah, it works really well, and it's another kind of nice point to work with things like anchor points. Okay, so looking at the time, I'm gonna keep going, Paul. I've got a few other things to show, and then we'll do the QA.
Cool,
So it might go over a little bit. I'm sorry.
No, that's good. All good.
Okay. All right. Let's do something else. Let's jump into here and look at so I have this ground plane that's 4 meters. And I'm going to bring this in at 2048. I'll discard this. So I've kind of showed this recently on one of my tutorials on my YouTube channel. And when we were at GDC, it went over pretty good, but I'm going to show a couple things about this. So what I want to do is just look at working and blending some ground information. So let's do here again. I'll probably just jump over to my assets here. Do kind of a ground. See if I can find. All right, I'm gonna grab this earthly soil. We'll bring that into Painter. Take just a moment for this to download. And then I'm going to grab just one of these other guys. I wonder if I could do them at the same time. I've never tried this. Let's see. Watch the whole thing crash. Oh, I can do a couple at the same time. All right, it's downloading. It's going to take a little bit. Okay, so what I'm going to do is bring these guys in, and what I want to do is I just want to blend these layers, and what I really want to showcase for this technique is just being able to use this compare mask filter to create masks. There's lots of ways to create masks in Painter. One of the ways I really like a lot is this compare mask. So I'm going to show you how this works, and then I'm going to show you a technique for working or fixing some displacement issues. All right, come on, eroded dry mud. These are created by our Substance 3D Assets teams, which we used to call Substance Source. Really cool name. We're trying to get it back. We talk about that in the that is something that we talk about all the time in the Substance 3D team. Like they were trying to say, hey, let's call the apps what they are. I don't know why they came up with that decision, but like I don't know. We're like, yeah, Source was cooler. Let's go back to that. So let's see. I have this guy. Let's throw him into here. Okay, and so this is a material. Like I said, I know the plane is 4 meters, so here's a great option for me to jump in and use my physical size. So that's going to tile the plane. If you ever want to know what the materials are, you can click this attributes, and here you will see this setting, and this is in centimeters. So just always know that pretty much everything we do in Substance is in centimeters. Okay, so I brought that in. Looks okay, I think. Earthly, let's do this guy on top of it. Well, before I do that, I'm going to come over here to my shader settings. Well, sorry guys, let me back up just a little bit. I want to make sure that I turn on my height information on this guy. So here I'm getting that problem again where it's that double normal, so I can just turn that off. So because I have my height information, I don't want that normal information on top of it. So I do have some height information here. And then I want to jump over to my shader settings under the displacement tab, and I'm going to increase my scale setting. So I'm going to increase this guy up just a little bit. So actually, maybe, I don't know, maybe something like that. So I'm actually getting some displacement here. It looks really chunky, so I can increase the subdivision count. All right, and that looks good, but it's too intense. So what I think I'm going to do, though, is I'm probably going to leave it at this 0.03. And I could jump into the substance, because it's a substance material, there's these parameters. I don't. I never do this though. I don't like messing with these values. I don't really. I didn't make it, so I don't really know like what was that controlling. So what I do is I just quickly just throw levels onto here, grab my height information, and then I'm just going to take that output white and just bring it down slightly. So I'm just tweaking the displacement for that one layer. That looks pretty good. Something else I'm going to do in this scene is jump over to my texture set settings. Let me add an ambient occlusion channel. Jump back to my layers, select the layer. Let's make, oh, ambient occlusion is on. Let's make sure it is. Yep, it's just not too intense. I go to my technical parameters. Let's increase that. There we go. That should work. All right, so we have that first layer. Now I'm going to grab this other one, this stones, earthly stones. We'll drag this guy in. And so then what we're going to start to get automatically is this, things are blending, right? And this is where the blending mode comes into play. Like I said, if we look at height, you can see it's blending linear dodge all the layers together. So that's nice that it's doing that for me. But I want to tweak that. So first things first, let me jump over to my scaling physical size because I know that's going to work. And for this layer, I'm going to increase my height information. So now I have height information, and that looks pretty good at that 0.03 value. So this is pretty nice. However, I want to start to kind of blend these layers together. So let's also make sure that my AO, okay, it's enabled. So what I can do is I can come over to my masking, and we have this option here called add mask with height combination. So like I said, there's many ways to mask things. You're going to either add like a white mask, a black mask, or a color selection as a masking tool. But then we have this other filter called height combination. So this is just a shortcut to that. If I select it and add it, it's going to add in the compare mask filter. I'm sorry, I think it's a generator. Nope, it's a filter. So it comes in and it adds. And if I look at my height information, here, let me do it this way. So we add a filter, and then I grab, whoops, that wasn't right. It just needs to be add a compare mask. Let me just check on that. It should. The shortcut is supposed to, and I'm wondering, I'm seeing something a little that I'm not used to seeing here. This is linear dodge. I don't think it's supposed to be at that, but let me check. Huh. I think it's fine now, actually. Never mind. So it's just a shortcut of being able to quickly add the mask. Oops, add a mask with the height combination. I think one early version, what it was doing was it was also setting the blending mode to a different mode, but it looks like it's not doing that. So that could be an update. That's what was throwing me off there. So now we have this compare mask option. This is super powerful because you can use this in all kinds of ways. So for example, what it does is it generates a mask based on the comparison of layers. And you can compare anything. Like you can do color, you can do sometimes I'll use it for color, and it's a cool way to be able to, like, for example, if I wanted to, like, maybe we'll try that a little bit later. But like in one case, it could be like, all right, I want to vary color based on some type of information, whether it be ambient occlusion information or something. You could have a color layer, mask it with layers below it, and then set the channel to be something like, hey, blend, like here I'm blending based on ambient occlusion information, or I'm blending based on, different value. In this case here, I'm going to use height. And what it shows in this histogram is it shows the height information for the green layer, which is this layer, and this kind of purple looking color is the layers below it. And where they overlap, you get this like cyan color. That is what is making the mask. So if I alt left click on my mask, this mask is the comparison, and the comparison mode is showing right here. You've got things like, is it greater than? If it is, create white. If it's not, create black. You can do lesser than. There's lots of information here. And then you can also play around with things like the overall kind of hardness of this. So this is, I can slightly back that off. Now, what's cool about it is if I wanted to come into here and kind of control this. So if I look and I drop this levels on top of this main layer, and I go into my height information, here is where I can start to, again, play with the height information. So I'm bringing these rocks up and down based on the height. So here you can see that the layer below, I'm just going to blend that in a little bit more. So get something like that. And it's just a really interesting way to kind of blend in this information. And then we can do other things like, okay, well, I've got that. Let's add a paint on top of it. And I'm just going to be painting height information. And then if I give it a positive value and I paint, I can go in and I can paint, but I'm painting this based on height. So this works a lot like if you were doing any type of like vertex painting inside of Unreal. Like if you ever done like a landscape material where they have that height blending mode, that's exactly what this is doing. So watch in this particular area. So there's some height information I've got this bump. So if I come into here and I start to paint, it'll slowly start to kind of build up around that area, but it's being capped or masked because I'm comparing it based on if values are greater or less than a certain value. So I get something like that, which is a kind of a neat little organic build. Then I can do something like, well, my colors don't match, so maybe I can just tweak the substance material parameters, but maybe what I'll do is add a filter on top of this and then try this. We do have something color match. I use this guy. And then this just lets me like a target color. I want to try something like that. And then I can, play with this a little bit, just try to get it to where the colors are in kind of the same range, something like that. That's another way. Or it could just be that I'm going in and just sampling based on the information from the layer below it. So I want to show you something really quick with this too, because we've made some like improvements to the color picker very recently. So if you're supposed to be able to hit the I key on the keyboard to bring up it's not working for me. I'm sure it's me doing something wrong. But if I select this guy and I move over, there's an option. If I hold down Shift, this will let me pick from the actual color channel below it. So basically not below it, but it's basically picking the color information from the base color from whatever channel you have selected. So that's where it's letting me do that. So here, I'm going to go in and just play around with just some of these colors, just to kind of tint this up a little bit, get something like this. Just a quick little tweak. Whoops. All right. I won't play with it too much, but we'll get something like that. Okay, so now I have this more of this blend based on height information. I typically at this point I kind of like to repurpose the ambient occlusion. So what I'll do is just jump over to my filters, and we have this horizon-based ambient occlusion filter. I'll drag this here to the top, and that is going to generate for me height information based on the height, which is my channel source. Which it could be normal too, but we're only using height. So if I adjust like my radius to this and my height depth, you can see I'm just darkening that a little bit. I'm going to over crank it just so you guys can see it, but I'm just creating new ambient occlusion information there on top. Okay, so now I have this information. One of the things I really love to do with this is I have this really nice ground plane. You can always export this. So export mesh, and I can export this, and I take this straight into Unreal and use it as an nanite mesh. I love it. It's awesome to do this. Now, what you would need to do would be to set this option, export with displacement and tessellation, and then I turn off recompute vertex normals. So it's going to export the mesh tessellated. So I'm going to have all my tessellation. All the vertex normals are going to be pointing straight up. So it'll look weird when you first bring it into Unreal. But when you export your textures, you are going to have a normal map at that point, and you want to apply the normal map. If you had recompute vertex normals on, it would basically bake the vertex normals to in the mesh. And then you would apply a normal map on top of that. You would get that double looking normal map that I showcased to you guys in Painter. So you would turn that off. Okay, so that's good. That's working. However, it isn't like this isn't like ZBrush or anything. It's basically taking, and you can see it right here. It's terrible. It's taking all the vertices and just pushing them straight up. And so you get something that looks kind of like that. Depending on what you're doing, that can be fine, right? So like, oh, that's okay. But let's take a look at ways you can fix that. A couple good options for this. So for example, one thing I like to do, I'm sorry, my kid just came home from school and he's like, he does this every day. He comes on the bus and he just freaks out. So if you guys are hearing that, yeah, he's wanting to play video games. He's like obsessed with Rocket League and I don't know. Yeah. Okay, so let's do this. Let me create. How am I going to do this? Oh yeah, I'm going to create just like a brush layer here. And then I'm going to jump over to, let's let's see. Oh, yeah. So here, I have a brush layer, and this is going to be displacement fix. Here's another option. I want to pass through everything, right? So for my base color, I'm going to set this to pass through. No, actually, I'm wrong. I'm sorry. I'm just going to do height information in this case. So notice I'm on the layer. I just have height information, and I hit pass through. Well, instead of dropping down, I can just do my right click, blending options. Hey, go ahead and just apply that to all channels. So again, if you look under my height, I have pass through. It's working. So now I have my height information here. And what I can do is just get my smudge tool, and I could come into here now and just start to smudge that guy just a little bit, and that just fixes it a little, slightly, So I can do things like that. That's a lot of trouble to do that over everything, but I was going to show you that's one technique that you can do. And again, I'd want to be careful about it. I can, make my brush size pretty small and just try to, just tweak that slightly in that area. Of course, you're just blurring it, right? Another way we could get this to work would be if I'm trying to think of a different way. I could, so let me do, let me create a fill layer this time, and we're going to do height. And I want to do the same trick. So under my height information, we are going to set that to pass through. Okay. And so that's all of my height information. So what I could do in this case, this is, again, this will be displacement fix as a fill layer. And let's try this. Let's do a filter on this guy and set it to blur. So blur, and it's blurring everything. I just want to blur my height information, but it's still just blurring my height information. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to mask this. So add a black mask. And then what I'm going to do is come into my, let's see, thinking about this. Let's add a filter in here. There's this other filter that I started using recently. I don't know how long it's been here, but I haven't used it until recently. Mask outline. So I'm going to add a mask outline into here. But before I do that, I first need to grab my anchor point. So I'm going to grab an anchor point here. And what layer do I want to work with? So what's really causing the problem is these stones, right? So let's come into the stones. I'm not going to use an anchor on that. Let's come into here where I had my compare mask. So it's generating my mask. And let's add an anchor point to that. We're going to come into my displacement fix. I didn't want an anchor point there. I wanted a fill layer. Put him down here. And we're going to grab that anchor point. So now we have it. And then we'll do mask outline. So what is this creating for me? It's going to create this little special mask. It's like an input, like an edge mask. And so I'm going to start from black. I turn that to false. And let's do, you can do, like if we do inside the mask, look what it's doing. It's pretty cool. So you have these little rocks, and inside the rock, so this would be really cool if I wanted to say, like, I was trying to make like a little bit of like, hey, I want the edging around the rock to be like dark, like maybe there's water there or something. I can do that. I can do outside, which is going to be like the outside. But really what I want to use is this option called both. So it does input and output, and I can play with this curve shape. I can even blur this a little bit to get something like that. So now my blur is essentially just going to be on the edging. And if we look at the blur now, this is kind of helping me. So this is what we had before with no blur. So it's really streaked. And it's straight up and down. But now because we have that edge mask, I'm doing this slight little gradient blur into here. And I get something more like that. And that is going to be, I think, better. It's not perfect, but I think it's better. And I can, again, jump back here to that mask outline, and I can adjust this based on the width. I can blur that more. I can maybe play with that curve shape, stuff like that. So that is, I find, to be kind of a really good technique to come in and just fix those issues on that. So that was a way to fix that displacement issue with that. And see, you got to watch. I'm blurring it a little too much, but and it could be a thing where once I get that, let's see, I'll just bring it back slightly. It's just a slight little blur. There we go. I think that works better for those edges. And again, I'll turn it on and off. Yeah, I like what it's doing over in this corner here. So if I look at it, it's like really harsh, and then it's just a slight little transitional element there. So that's how I kind of do these different ground planes and stuff. And I think I've showed this displacement fix, but using this method I think is kind of a new way that I kind of ended up liking a little bit better. Okay, there was something else I wanted to show you guys too. Instead of walking through the whole thing, I'm just going to open up the file. I mean, instead of doing it um, from scratch, I'm just going to walk through it. But I was working on this effect, thinking, oh, this will be kind of neat to showcase. And there was a couple things in here I wanted to showcase to you guys that I was using to do this. So let me just walk through this before we do the Q&A. So first things first, I have this base layer. So I have a base layer, then I do a color layer on top of it. And this color layer, again, it's like I said, I always do this. I mask, I get my color value because now I have something that I can easily, like, in more tweak. So I can go in and say, you know what, I want that to be just tinted a little bit more, no problem. I never try to really bake anything down. So here's another layer on top. Maybe this needs to be a little bit more white. Let's do something like that. Okay, great. So that's like kind of like the basic wall. Then I added a layer on top of this guy, and let's just bring this guy down layer by layer here. And there's a series of masks. So what I can do is I think I can just turn this to here. Let's do this. Let's go in and add a fill and set it to white. Okay. So I have my base color layer, and then on top, I'm doing the same thing. Let's add a little bit of variation, a little bit more variation to get something like this. And then I have a little height information where I'm adding very slight, just a little bit of detail. So now I basically have these two layers. I have the bottom, and I have the painted layer that's going to be on top of it. And so what we want to do now is start looking at how can we start to mask this. So first things first, I create a layer mask. And you'll notice that the way I wanted to do this was I just put these guys into layers. Folders. And this guy I put into a folder because I wanted to have these different layers. I try to layer all of the information as much as possible. And I know it ends up being a lot of work and you get a lot of layers, but the more variation, even no matter how subtle, the more variation you get, the better things tend to look. So if we look at the mask, first thing is I use just a mask for grunge. And I put this guy into place here. And at the very top, you can see that I decided to go ahead and just throw that horizon-based ambient occlusion filter because that's just going to help things look a little bit more dimensional. So then this is where I wanted to start showing you guys some new techniques. So then I have my grunge map. So I get this guy. I was like, okay, well, it's giving me this shape, but I want to warp this a little bit. So let me throw a warp filter on top of it. Now, this is something that's really cool. It's very, very new. Is we've added the capability that when you're adding filters, whether they be inside of a mask or inside of a layer, you can actually do blending modes on top of this now. So before you would add a filter, you did not have the capability to work with a blending mode or a mask. And it was a lot of trouble to kind of do that. Just case in point, I'll show you something. So like one thing I would commonly do was I would come into here and say, oh, I want to make like an edge mat. So I would do something like this. I would say, okay, well, I'm going to add a filter and I'm going to blur it. So I would come in and do this. I would blur it. And then I would basically go through the steps of let me blur something, let me invert it, and then let me try to place it back inside of itself. And to do that, I had to add like, I would typically have to add an anchor point, and then I'd have to have a new layer on top of it, and then use that, bring that information in so I can invert it back. But now, because we have these blending modes, you could do something really simple now. Like, it's set to replace by default, and that is basically just meaning that's the exact same result you would get before we added the blending mode. So that's what that means. But now I could do something like, I think just do like a subtract, and within one step. So I have my filter, blur, boom. I have my little edge mask. Before I had to do a bunch of steps. I had to blur it. I had to then do a levels and invert it. Like I said, add an anchor point. I had to do all this stuff. So this is great. So this is a really cool way just to make a quick edge mat. And that's kind of what that mask outline filter, this is exactly what this thing's doing to a point. It just gives you a little bit more flexibility. So anyways, I just want to show you that's super helpful. So what I did was same thing. I added a warp on top of this guy, and this time I'm multiplying the warp down. Then I added a slope blur to add just a little bit more edging. You can see, again, I'm taking advantage of using these multiply modes. Then I'm adding a levels on top of that just to get the, because what was happening was it was just too smeared in this gray value, so we had a levels on it. And then here I'm anchoring this information down because I want to use this mask somewhere else. So at this point, I ended up getting something that looked kind of like this. And then I have this little control now. If I come over to the grunge map and I play with the balance, I can get kind of this interactive, like, ripping effect or, peeling effect, I guess. So next thing was let's do the peeling part of it. So I'll enable this layer, and let me just turn off my layers. So it's a layer on top, and you can see I set a height value positive, and my fill is just going to be the mask. So I'm using my anchor point, bring in my mask, and then I want to get the outline. So like I said before, I used to have to do all this stuff, like blur, invert, do all this, but now I just use mask outline in this case, and it gives me this. And so now what I can do, and I love that this thing has here. Let me turn off the blur, and this curve shape is awesome. So I can just do something like this, and you get this really nice kind of fall off. Really great for peeling effects. So if we look, this is starting to give me, if I move my light around, this is starting to give me this peeling effect here. So that's what it was. So we get something like that. Then I have this little edge effect on top of it. And so what this guy is, same thing again. I go in and I get my anchor point. I do a mask outline. This time I'm adding subtracting a fractal sum to like break up and get these little edges like this, and then a levels on top just to kind of, uh, you know, just kind of get rid of some of those. I'm just playing with it again now. Maybe it's some. I mean, that's a cool little rip effect. You can get some neat things like that. So let me try to do it more like, I don't know. You can play with these things forever. But so we get this, and now I get this little bit of an edge. I really overcranked it. I probably shouldn't have done that. Let me just undo it real quick. Okay, something like that. And then I just added like a little bit of a, slight tint to the color on the edges, something like that. And then I had just some overall kind of cracks, just some cracks on the inside, and just kind of real kind of rough was just putting something together like this. And the main benefit I was trying to showcase with this technique was this whole process of, now that we have filters, we can actually multiply and use blending modes and all these filters. And again, it saves a great bit of time. So for example, if we jump back over to this guy and I play with it, this is kind of like the peeling effect that I'm kind of trying to get on this smart material. And then of course, once it's all done, get everything built up with all this stuff, I could just throw all of this into like one big folder and create a smart material so I can use this again. Okay, so with that, Paul, I think I will go ahead and close it out. Let's see if we can't get some of these questions going.
That would be awesome. Wes, that was absolutely fantastic. I think I sort of speak for everyone in saying that we all have picked up at least one thing, probably several things that we weren't aware of. So I really appreciate that. Just mind blowing things I've
Oh,
never
great.
even
Thank
knew
you.
existed. So it's really nice to kind of see how these things work. Um,
Great. Thank you.
no, thank you for taking the time. I'll try and get through these questions really quickly. So let me see. Mine was the first one, I think.
Okay.
So question number one. This one's from me. So one of the things that I think you're probably aware of to some degree, a lot of the community have been asking, and I know that you're probably limited in what you can say, but I guess sort of secondary UV support within Painter itself. So currently, Painter kind of targets the sort of the first UV set in assets by default, and I think a lot of people are kind of asking about sort of native embedded secondary UV support. Are you aware of anything that's happening around that, or can you see
Um,
anything that's happening
y-
around that?
yeah. So, and that was something that we brought up during Substance Days at GDC just recently. So, yeah, we're super aware of it. I don't have any news.
Hmm.
I know the dev team is aware. It is a feature request. I don't know what they're gonna do, but I can say that like we push for it like a lot. So I actually work on what's called the art and development team inside of the 3D&I org for Substance. And so part of our job is we work alongside the developers to like give them an artist perspective over using the tools.
Hmm.
And so I can tell you, all of us are asking for
Hmm.
that as well. And so just I'm on your side. I want it to, so we push for it. So yeah, I totally understand the frustration behind it. Like there was a project that we just worked on internally recently, and we were like, we need this, we need this. So we're pushing for it.
Cool.
I don't
No,
know what they're
that's
gonna do,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
but know that we're pushing for it too.
Awesome, awesome. That's good to hear. Okay, next question. What do you consider to be the most interesting sort of area of development within modern texturing? So you've probably seen a lot of things, like probably from the introduction of PBR. Like I don't know about you, but like I worked pre PBR, and sort of what do you think is kind of like the next, or is there kind of something you can point towards as something that's sort of really interesting or emerging, and you think is going to
Oh,
change how texturing goes in the next few years?
yeah, I mean, that is really interesting. Great question. I'm with you, Paul. Like I was started a long, long, long time ago. It was like, there wasn't even substance at all, and it
Mm-hmm.
was hand authoring textures in Photoshop, and like I couldn't do it. Like that was the thing. I couldn't make textures. I just couldn't do it. And so, yeah, PBR was a huge shift. It was a huge change, and from that point on, I was able to sort of start to do things. So that was a huge shift. In terms of texturing and what's coming, like, I don't know. I mean, this is a great question because, like, I guess, I mean, where I gotta go is that one area I'm probably none of us want to talk about, which is the AI stuff,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think there's gonna be something with that, whether we like it or not. So yeah, I'm concerned over that. But again, I think that like what I know, the things they do at the substance team, there's things around that, which is like, could there be ways of using AI to help with texturing in a sense that's more of like a tool
Yeah.
instead of like, oh, just do this thing for me, right? Like if
Mm-hmm.
it's like, hey, I have this material and I want to wear the edges or something. Can you just wear the edges randomly, blah, blah, blah? And maybe it does it, something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
I can see things like that coming. I know we experiment with stuff. But I think, yeah, I mean, I guess to answer your question, I would say, well, I don't know. I think there's going to be something with that's coming
AI
down the
related.
pipe.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
I agree.
yeah, I think so. Just in general, right? Like, I think
Mm-hmm.
it's such a thing that it's like such a topic that everybody's looking into. I mean,
Right.
I personally, I'm not really a fan of that kind of stuff. So, like, I don't
Same.
know. I
Yeah,
kind
yeah.
of stay out of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not something I don't know. I just
Something
and
off
I
about
don't
it.
any
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and anybody, like I don't tell anybody what if they if use what you like, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
use whatever software, even if you don't like Substance. That's I don't care. It's like
Yeah.
we're all artists. Yeah, I'm an artist first, so I
Yeah.
like to just talk to people and artists, and
Art. Yeah, yeah.
and yeah, yeah. So, but anyways, yeah, that's a touchy subject, I think, and it's like one of those things where I'm concerned about that. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know what that means,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but
No,
I
it's a
do
very
know that
honest
the
answer.
substance yeah, I
Yeah.
know the substance team looks at it from a very ethical and a very like
Mm-hmm.
artist centric standpoint. So
That's
I
good
don't
to
know.
hear.
I
That's good to hear.
I'm interested to see what they do.
Okay, cool. I'm gonna skip the next one because I think there's been several standout wow moments. So I kind of asked about sort of things that sort of resonate strongly in your demonstrations, but I think we've had several of those. So I'll skip past that one, and I'll go to Melissa's question. Melissa asks, when you have a layer and a mask and multiple fills, can you add a filter like a blur? Is there a way to have the filter only affect the one fill below? So what do
There's
you?
there
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know, not really. And that's a huge pain. Like so that's an actual feature request that we've been talking about. Like what I would love to be able to do is, for example, like I want to be able to do this, like where you go in and you add, say, a blur, and like you can in Photoshop. I think you hit Alt left click and it just like it like
Oh,
links it
right.
to this
Yeah.
to that.
Mm-hmm.
That was the request that we talk about internally. So I just want to be able to do that. A little bit of a workaround behind it is trying to use these blending modes, but it doesn't affect just the one below it. It's affecting everything. So, the kind of the workaround that I've had to do in the past would be like, okay, anchor this, take it to a whole new layer that's masked, and do it that way, and it's a lot of trouble. So hopefully we'll be able to do this like link. Like I said, I just want to be able to alt click and it just does the little arrow. Boom! I'm just gonna work on that fill right below me, so hopefully they'll do that. But yeah, it's definitely something we've requested.
Okay, so like a clipping mask, essentially, sort of, yeah, with the layer below.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah. The way I described it was to the dev team was just like Photoshop. I like how they do it. You hold down Alt and left click, and
Yeah,
it draws this little arrow, and it's like, nope, I'm just working on that one layer.
cool. That would be very, very useful. Next question is from Salvador. You touched on it a little bit, but what are some of the recommendations for the creation of a good roughness map? And maybe what are some of the techniques for it?
Oh yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, we could talk about that forever, but
Mm-hmm.
like, the kind of my take on it is I feel like the roughness map is like the most important map you're gonna author because like it's like the most creative map. when you look at PBR and there's some guidelines that you follow, but like roughness, I mean, there isn't really like a specific guideline. It's like you just kind of author into it like what you want. So like one of the things that I think about, and I didn't even do roughness at all on this yet. So like one of the things that I think about is like variation being like one of the most important things,
Mhm.
and then being able to think about the character of what you're doing. Like I really look at it like roughness is like you're telling a story about the asset. Like what environment was this in? What kind of care did it have? Is there scratches? But the scratches are in a very certain way for a certain reason, and that can even tell a story about how the thing was cared for, or how where it sat, or a story of what happened to it, right? So yeah, I think that like layering and variation is what makes it important. And then also a lot of times it's just the subtle things. Like even if it's just like very, very small, like nothing is perfect, right? Even if you say something brand new, if you look at it at a microscopic level, there's always some type of something there that is going to disperse light somehow,
Yeah.
and so I think as a quick answer, like I think that just variation, and then just spending time to tell the story of your asset through the roughness information.
Awesome. Cool. Very good answer. Okay, next one is from Connor. How often do you find yourself creating materials in Designer and bringing them over into Painter versus working just procedurally in Painter itself?
Well, I used to do that a lot. Like I used to spend all my time in Designer. In the last, I would say, year or so, I haven't really done much. Like I used to just make like really get into making just procedural materials in Designer, and I just really haven't done it that much. I think it's also kind of just the nature of like the job as well. Like for example, for me, like I'm talking to different groups a lot, and sometimes like starting a discussion like showcasing substance is kind of daunting to start with Designer. So a lot of times I see that, okay, well, the introduction part of it's going to be Painter or something, so I'm kind of in that realm. But then also, I guess just in my own right, like I started just to have more fun, like trying to maybe not take all the time to make everything completely procedural in Designer, and then try to bring it over. Like sometimes like, oh, here, let me just grab some photos or something. I can try to just crank it a little bit faster inside of Painter. So yeah, that's I don't know. I used to do way more Designer, and then it was kind of transitioning where it was like, okay, well, I'm doing everything in Designer and I bring it into Painter, and now I'm just doing a lot more stuff in Painter these days lately. But mainly I think it has to do with just because of the way and the audiences I have to demo in front of.
Yeah, I think Painter's evolved as well. Like you've got a lot of the things that are in Designer, like sort of some of those functions and features have come across into Painter as well, which has helped, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, that, and also too, something else that I've really started to use a ton is Sampler, because like
Yeah.
there's a lot of tools within that where I can go in and I can take a photograph. Like I'll do this all the time. Like, and this is probably not healthy, but like I'm out, instead of like enjoying outside and having fun, I'm taking pictures of texture references all the time.
Oh,
So I have
yeah.
this huge library of this stuff, and it's like, oh, I could just throw that in Sampler, make it into a material, and then we added the capability to expose parameters, so I can expose parameters and send it into Painter, and it is faster.
Yeah.
So like I kind of been doing that lately. But yeah, none of that replaces the ability to do like full procedural materials. Like if you're like working in a production and building up of this vast library of materials, yeah, I don't think, yeah, you can't replace that. And I still think Designer is the coolest tool that we have. Like I think in terms of like something that's truly like, wow,
Mm-hmm.
that's super innovative. Like
Mm-hmm.
a Designer's the main tool.
Cool, cool. Okay, a bit of I guess, a career question. So, Melissa, everyone knows you from your tutorials, but how did you end up there? Like, how was your career journey up to this point?
Well, that's a weird story. Like, so yeah, so I'm kind of an older guy. I'm like, I'll be 46 soon. And so when I started, it was like, I was like 20 years old. And so that was like 1997 or something. And when I was like trying to get into stuff, and it was like, and I wanted to be a photographer. Like that was my dream. I wanted to be a photographer, and there was no digital cameras. It was that it was like you shoot on film or chrome slide film, and that's what it was. And so like I was doing that. I was working in different studios, like doing commercial photography as like an assistant, trying to get the job doing that. And I worked in this camera store, and long story short, like they were like started to bring in like digital cameras were starting to become a thing. And I was like, wow, this is nuts. Like, I mean, I'm not gonna have a job anymore. It kind of reminds me of the AI thing. You know,
Yeah.
I was like, well, what am I gonna do? Like, I mean, like these huge studios like that they were closing where I live, and I was like, oh, they're just doing digital stuff now. And so then I just reluctantly was like, well, I guess I got to learn computers because I was like anti-computers completely. I was like, no, it has to be like, shot on film. And, I had my own
Purist.
dark room at my house.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was like, so I got into that. I started doing like graphic design stuff. And the funny thing is I remember like the first computer book I ever looked at was this like Photoshop like 3 or 4 book. And I
Mm.
remember flipping through it. It's really funny to think I never would have dreamed if I could go back to that when I was that like young guy, like, oh, I'm gonna work there at Adobe some. Like I never would have dreamed. That's so weird,
Right.
right? Like
Right.
what a
Yeah.
I've never thought
That's
that would happen.
crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. So I, got a little tired of the photography, and I thought, oh, I'm gonna get into video. That would be kind of cool. Maybe I'll do video editing. And when I was at this, I do this internship. That was one thing I did all the time. Is I would call places up and say, hey, I just want to learn this. Can I just come and do internship? And they never paid me, and I was like, I don't care. I don't care. I don't need money. I just want to I
Yeah.
just wanted to learn, right?
Hmm.
And so I did so many of these internships at places, and they didn't pay me. They paid me in knowledge, which, in the
Hmm.
end of it was better, But anyways, so I was at this video place, and I was like, I saw a 3D program. I think it was Lightwave 3D, and I was
Hmm.
like, oh, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen. It's a photography studio. So I just fell in love with it, and then I just immersed myself in 3D from that point on.
The rest is
I
history.
worked,
Yeah.
yeah, and I live in Louisville, Kentucky, which is like nowhere, right? So to get to Algorithmic, I was working at UPS, like the shipping company, and I worked as a multimedia designer, and I was doing training for aircraft mechanics. So I was like modeling aircraft engine parts and stuff.
Hmm.
I somehow I found something about this substance application. What it was you guys know the tool Modo
Hmm.
from it was Luxology and then now the Foundry. They had this tool called Image Synth, which was like this separate app that would let you make tileable textures. And at the very bottom of it, it said powered by Algorithmic. And I was like, ooh, what is that? So I searched out whatever this was, and I found they had this tool called Map Zone. So I started playing with that. And then
Wow.
they had a tool called Substance Designer. And then around that time, like Twitter was a thing, right? So I
Hmm.
started, like, it just started, and I was like just making tweets about this amazing tool called Substance Designer. Well, then Seb,
Yeah.
the
Hmm.
CEO of Algorithmic, he like sent me a message going, "Hey, we don't have anyone doing this. Like, thank you for making all these like
Wow.
posts about our tool." And then so I kept doing it. I loved it. I just absolutely loved this tool. I thought this is the greatest thing I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And I love Substance. And so I kept doing that. And then they were like, "Do you want to come to GDC and like just talk about it?" And they go, "We can't pay you." Because they had no
No
money,
money.
right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
we can't pay you, but they did like, we'll buy your airline ticket and we'll pay for your hotel and we'll buy you food, but we can't. And I was like, yes, I'll do it. So then, like, I would do that with them, and then eventually, Substance all of a sudden started
Hmm.
becoming something, right? So I
Yeah.
had worked with them like before it became anything, and then it was around, Substance Designer 4 that PBR came in, and that's when that shift happened,
Hmm.
and we were
Hmm.
just, yeah, at the right place at the right time with the right tools. And then they gave me they were like, oh, we can hire you. Oh, sorry, that's the Siri thing.
You're
They were
right.
like, hey, we can give you we can hire you now. So I
Yeah.
was like, great. So I totally did it. I think I was the first U.S. employee that they had,
Wow.
and yeah, that was like over 10
So
years ago.
post your stuff on Twitter. I think that's the message. That's really cool.
Yeah,
Awesome.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, and that's the thing. Like sometimes, like people talk about like substance, and
Hmm.
sometimes I feel like, oh, people think I just say that because I work here and I have to. But no, I truly love it. Like the
Hmm. Hmm.
substance, the algorithmic, and that's the really cool thing about where we are now is it's all the same people, like the same
Yeah.
bosses, the same people in charge, and it's like yeah, it's like they're like my family. So it's
Yeah.
like, I don't know. I'm just having a blast working there. It's
I
just
think a lot
fun
of
being
people
with that
were
group.
sorry to overtalk you. I think a lot of people
Oh, yeah.
were worried when the Adobe thing happened.
Oh,
Um,
me too. Yeah.
yeah, I think a lot
Yeah,
of
that
people
was
thought.
scary.
Yeah, I thought the identity would have been
Yeah.
lost, but you seem to have done a really good job with that. To be fair, so like the same
Yeah,
people are there,
yeah.
and yeah, yeah, yeah. Cool, cool.
I gotta be honest, it's really awesome. Like I'm super happy. Like it's like stable now. Like I feel
Yeah.
like I have a stable like oh because that was one thing I had like when I made this choice, and that
Hmm.
was a scary thing. I was in my 40s and I have like a wife, I had 3 kids. I was
Yeah.
like, man, I'm gonna make this chance. This is like small startup, a French company. Like at
Yeah.
least at this job I have, which I hate. I mean, at least I have insurance. I have all the, you know what I mean. I was like,
Yeah. Big risk.
but
Yeah.
yeah, I told myself like, hey, if this will be if I don't do it, this will be something I regret for the rest of my life. So I took the
Man,
chance, and it
did
worked
the right
out in
thing.
my case.
Cool, cool.
Yeah.
Skip the next one because you've touched on anchor points. So Florian, why does a created, why does a new created layer have every channel enabled by default? Are there any plans to change that in the future?
Um, yeah, that's a good question. I know that's come up before. And I don't know the answer, but I thought like uh yeah, I don't know the answer to that. But I think that's something that we brought up before. Like, do you mean like when I create a fill, like I just did everything's enabled? Um, like is there a way of like could I hold down a shortcut or something that just enables certain channels or something like that?
I guess with
I
the
think
alt
that's
click, you can kind of quickly change that now anyway. The little shortcut that
yeah,
you mentioned, but
right. Like and that was something we added, not recently, but yeah, before that it was like turn everything off, but I can't hold down like alt and left click metal and I just get that. So it's like, couple clicks to get there. But that is a good question. I think that is something that they brought up. And that's a great suggestion too. We're always looking at usability. To be honest with you, I mean, as much as I love the tool, I do. I am one of the top complainers too. So like, we are like talking, and we do that out of like because I just want it to be the best it can, right? So there's all kinds of usability things. It was funny because internally I was just in a meeting today, and we're doing that. We're talking about, hey, this is hard. I have to click this so many times to do this. Like one big thing for me is like I have this fill layer. I just want to drag this to the layer and have it make like I just want to do that, but I can't. I have to like go here, add fill, do it's
mhm.
3 or 4 clicks. So yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, it's being talked about. Hopefully, we'll address it.
Cool, cool. We've got two more questions, both from Steve. So first one is, are physical sizes applied to the default materials within Substance Painter as well as the ones from the Substance Assets library? So is physical size enabled
Um,
by default, I guess, on the materials that are built into Painter?
I don't think they are.
Hmm.
Um, that is a good question. I mean, I'll check one really quick just to see, but like, well, I have a bunch of stuff in here. I don't. But this is something too. Like right now, this is all being looked at. Like about this being reworked. Um, I always tend to say more than I'm supposed to. So like, hopefully it's okay. But like, yeah,
Yeah.
I think there's gonna be some rework that'll address that issue. But I think like for right now, I don't think so. I have so many of these custom ones in here. I don't really remember. But like, I don't know if it's this one. Yeah, this one. I think maybe they are. I don't know. But like I said, the best way to check would be to come over here to attributes, and
Attributes.
then you can. Oh, if it has it here, then it works.
Okay.
But I do think that's something we'll address in the future.
Cool. And final question. So you touched on it a little at the beginning with roughness. What are your go-to methods for applying color variation on top of material layers? Are there any filters or generators that you would recommend?
Oh, I'm sorry. Could you repeat that one more
Yeah,
time?
sure. So it's relating to color variation. So you touched on this a
Yeah.
little at the beginning with roughness, but what are your go-to methods for applying color variation on top of material layers? Are there any filters or generators you would recommend?
Oh, yeah. Let me look at a couple of these. So one thing that I kind of do is more of a manual process. Like for example, I'll start to add like a layer that I have just color, and I will set a few different colors. Like maybe it's something like a brown, right? So I'll do something like this, and then duplicate it, and then maybe slightly change the variation, and then I'm kind of masking these. So I kind of do that a lot. Sometimes I kind of do like a little bit of optical mixing. So for example, it may just be okay. Well, I have those colors, but let me just slightly adjust the opacities and then maybe do like one mask between these two. So sometimes I kind of work that way. Some other options would be like there are some things, and I haven't really played with them too much, but if you look, we do have a couple of these things. Like there is the ability to add like some various gradients. Color match does have some of this. I kind of struggle with this a little bit, but for example, when you're in the source color mode set to average, it basically tries to average between like parameters and target inputs. You can also in one thing that's interesting is you could say I want my source mode to be an input, and then maybe this is something where you have maybe like a color gradient or something that kind of represents a little bit of a color scheme that you can throw in that can kind of help colorize that. So the color match is kind of good for that. That's an option. And like I said, there's also different other filters in here for color that are going to work with like the gradients. Like if you want to try to add in, sometimes I try to use this one kind of. And it's funny because I think of my background in designer. I tend to try to work in Painter like I would in designer, and you can do that to a point. But like here's an option where like I have my gradient, and like in Substance Designer, you'd have your gradient node, and you fill in like a grayscale on top of it. So what I'm kind of doing here is it could be something like this, where I add like so I'm going to add a fill, and let's say that I did something like just like a grunge map here in this fill for just like say the color, and then you have like this gradient on top, and then kind of like you would do inside a Substance Designer. I'm just going to do like some really crazy colors so you can see it.
Gradient map.
Yeah, but like so you have your grayscale input, you're using the gradient map, and I can add more points to this, but that's kind of a technique that I would use inside of Designer to add some variation. So sometimes and this is kind of the way I would do it with filters is like you have this on top, you're gonna add and again I can lessen the amount so get something like that, and then colorize it with a gradient on top of it through here, and then play around with the positions. Oops, I hit a bunch of those quality settings. And then even on top of that, from there, you can add a filter to bring in like that HSL. And like I said, this is, whoops, that went on the wrong way. But this is like the same technique I would use in, say, Designer. And I feel like this works pretty well. So you can do like maybe desaturate some of these values, shift the hues, stuff like that. And then use your blending modes on top of this to bring it down. So here you can see I'm adding just a little bit of variation on top of that. I mean, it's terrible colors, but I don't know. That's kind of cool, actually. So, like if I zoom in really close, like that little speckly color information, I don't know. That's kind of neat, So
It's almost like
that works.
iridescence. Yeah.
Yeah. So that worked. But yeah, I would do that technique right there. Probably something like that. And again, This is like how I would operate in Designer, and it's for the most part you can kind of do those same techniques in Painter.
Cool. Wes, I can't thank you enough. It's way over time. I appreciate you taking time out of your evening. Wes's socials are in the workshop chat channel. If you're not already following Wes, I'm sure many of you already are, but if you're not, his Twitter and details are there for you to follow. We really appreciate that. I think everybody has learned a wealth of information this evening, so I can't thank you enough for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Paul, for inviting me. This was really cool, and thank you everyone for staying and hearing me blab on for a
It's
while.
amazing, dude.
I had a great time. This was really cool, and then I also like to throw out there if anybody ever has any questions or you need anything, just hit me up anytime. I'm always open to help anyone. So yeah, if you're stuck or need something, just hit me up. I'm always happy to help.
Appreciate that, dude.